Hey there, YouTubers. This is a little video concerning my 39 Pontiac. These are before pictures showing the suspension up high, and here's the after pictures showing the dropped spindle supports that were installed. And I think I got about 2 inches with dropped spindle supports, and I got another 2 inches using smaller tires. So I got the front end of my 39 down looking cool. This front end geometry is the spindle support there on the left, and you see the A-arm, and on the bottom view of the A-arm. They use pins that are threaded on the top and the bottom in the they're sort of threaded into the A-arms. There's some pictures of the spring, of course. More about these pins later. There's a view of the bottom A-arm, and so one with a bunch of labels showing spindle supports and the spindle and the kingpins and the components of this antique suspension, which I took apart to get the spindle supports out of there. I had to take everything apart. It was all covered with mud, so I'll get the parts apart. What do they call these things? The lower pivot pins and the eccentric pins and so on for caster camber adjustment. I'd get them out of there. That's where the spring went, up in the frame. There's one of the adjustment pins showing the eccentric for caster or camber, whichever one it was. All the adjustments are 0. So, for those of you that want to know such things. Well, the adjustment, you can set a caster and camber at 0. That's within the spec. I forget what the actual spec is. But it doesn't matter. When you got your suspension apart like this, you're just trying to figure out how to get it back together. So using hammers and big sockets and torches and whatnot, you just take everything apart. Pretty soon, presently, you got the spring sitting out there. You got your drop spindle supports in, and you put the suspension way up here, like you're going over a big bump, and you notice that there's a problem with your tie rod. You can see the tie rod below there, and the steering arms hovering over the tie rod. From the top, everything looks good, and you're happy. But when you see it from the side, you notice that your tie rod's going to bang into the frame when the suspension goes up as far as it goes. So these steering arms, you got to alter them with the fire wrench. So you go borrow one of those things from your neighbor and bring it over, heat those suckers up. This is a comparison of the old spindle supports and the new dropped spindle support, which is dropped higher so that the suspension goes higher and makes the car go lower. So that's how that works. Here's showing my dial gauge there. So this is a jig I built to heat up the what do they call these things? The steering arm, and heat them up and bend them. And I wanted to get them both bent the same, so I built this jig so that I could bend both items both the same. And clamp it in the vise and heat it up and bend them down. There's another picture of the old and the new showing my calipers, and here's the old and the new beside one another. Notice there's a pin missing on the old one there. That was a hard sucker to get out. It was a tapered pin in there holding the what do they call that thing? Holding the kingpin. Holding the kingpin in. And new spindle sports had a little screw, so a lot nicer. Here's a bunch of pictures of the tie rods and the cross shaft and the pitman arm and the parts that hold the pitman arm and the cross shaft and blah blah blah. This is a little showing the screw that screws the whole thing together and tightens it all up there. Put a little cotter pin in the end of the cross shaft and holds everything together. This is another picture of the exploded diagram on my driveway. Great stuff. Or boring your socks off. It depends on how much you like automotive parts. I just took these pictures for my own amusement. As at the time I was sort of fascinated with the whole thing, but it's kind of boring if you know what this stuff is all about. But at the time I took these, I was fascinated. These I don't know what new parts look like, but this is what the old 1939 Pontiac parts look like. All apart. Good old GM stuff, still works fine. Took them apart, cleaned them up, re-grease them, put them back together. Works like a champ. One more. Ooh, nice. Well, one more, another one. Oh, I fell asleep there. Sorry. Okay, well, that was amazing, wasn't it? It was just a fascination. This is an incredible close-up. Here you see the lower A-arm. I had these lever arm shock absorbers that don't work. So I decided I needed to put in new shock absorbers. So I had to weld something on the lower A-arm. So I welded a bolt onto the lower A-arm, and then figured out how far the suspension went and picked out some shock absorbers that turned out to be back shocks for a Thunderbird. Well, the back shocks have a different compression and rebound rate than you're supposed to have on the front end of your hot rod, so that turned out to be a problem. After I drove the car, I noticed that every time I went over a bump, the whole front end of the car came flying up in the air because the shocks were so hard and didn't want to give. So I called around and I finally found some shock absorbers that they have. Oh, there I am. Hi there, YouTube. Anyway, I called around and I found some shocks that were for the front end. They have a different compression and rebound rate meant for front ends, and they work fine. A lot softer ride, nicer ride. So far, the shock towers that I built work good. The bottom bolts have held in there good, work fine. These are all just details of the. I just used angle iron, angle steel, whatever, and cut them and made them stick on there. Had to miss the inner fenders, so I kept testing the fender to see if I could still get it on after I welded these things on. That all worked good. Got the suspension parts to go up and down without hitting the shock absorber. That was important. There you can see I was still cutting and welding on my headers. So there you go. There's my ice water and my welding helmet. Gotta have both, you know, to do welding. Here's another picture of the shock. And another picture. Fascinating, isn't it? And there's a fuel pump right there. And a front engine mount. And there's what it looks like without the shock absorber. This is sort of backwards, isn't it? Yep, there's some masking tape down on the lower A-arm showing you where to put the shock absorber mount. And this is the vice grips holding on there, because you gotta have something to hold it on while you're welding. And then I used a socket to cover up my nut so it didn't get all welded on when I welded my fixture on there. Kept clamping it on until it was cut right and angled right. There's a picture of my hand holding stuff together. It's all taken from, of course, underneath the car. A fun place to be. Lay down there in the freezing cold during the winter. I think it's took me about a year to do all this stuff. Yes, I don't work very quick. Yep, there's my socket, and you can see the welding on it. I just welded stuff up until it all worked good. Kept grinding it down, welding it, and grinding and welding. And eventually it seemed to look good, work good. Put the shock on there and cut the end of the bolt off good. Boom zoom, Bob's your uncle. Well, there you go, YouTube. That's how I put drop spindle supports in my 39 Pontiac.